How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the podcast. Is Dexter Series 1, Episode 2 Revisited, episode titled Crocodile. Now, a lot went on in this episode. There's a lot to cover. I've got 4 pages of notes. I'm getting a little bit carried away with my notes lately, but I want to just make sure that everything that happens I can put in there, and then we can break it down and go into it a little bit further. But anyway, let's just dive straight in because there is a lot of ground to cover today. So if this is your first time visiting the podcast, just want to quickly remind you that we are available on Spotify. There is also a YouTube channel where the episodes will also appear. All of those can be found at the Ocular Pod Down. That's all you need to search for. Obviously, click subscribe, follow all that usual stuff, whatever it is that you do. And join me in this revisited series. We're going to be going back through every single episode of Dexter that there ever was, hopefully in time for the 10-episode revisited series that we are looking forward to for 2021, where they will hopefully right the wrongs of the ending of the Dexter show. However, we have got a long way to go before we get there, and as I mentioned, we are starting off this particular episode with the episode 2 Crocodile. Now, this one was quite a good one. I enjoyed this one. We're still obviously early stages in the series, laying the groundwork for who these characters are, getting to know them a little bit better. And yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on in this one. It seems to be, I don't know if this is a thing that runs through the entire series, but it's definitely the way the first couple of episodes have panned out, as we have a kind of a victim of the week sort of thing. So last week we had 2 guys that got killed in the first episode. I think there's just the one in this guy, but I have literally watched this episode yesterday and I'm recording the podcast the day after. So I've got all my notes in front of me. So I think, just going back, there was only one victim of Dexter's at least. But obviously we'll dive into that. The guy who is the victim, incidentally, we'll cover that briefly before we dive too far into the actual episode. In the episode, I believe he's called Matt Chambers. He's played by an actor known as Sam Trammell, more famous for his role in True Blood, where he played Sam Malott, the guy who owned the bar. And that's a show that I absolutely loved as well. So maybe at some point down the line, obviously we've got a long way to go before we get anywhere to that, but maybe at some point we'll go through True Blood as well. Who knows? That could be quite a lot of fun. But before we get there, let's start off with how this episode started off, and it is Dexter out on his boat, just relaxing in the water. He's just floating, laid out on top of the water, just floating in the water. I don't know exactly where he is, but there's just kind of seems very relaxing, very nice. And in his monologue, he's saying to us that he dreams that he is floating on the surface of his own life, like he's an outsider looking in. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing. It's kind of like he's just going through the motions, and some things he just does without realizing he's doing them, maybe. But anyway, he also mentions, in this part I found very interesting, he said, soon enough he will have to go back to doing what he does, so he makes a point to enjoy days like this. Now, does he mean he'll have to go back to his day job where he has to go and deal with all these crime scenes? Or is he referring to the dark passenger side of him, where he has to go back and kill people because that's who he is and that's what he does? I found it interesting that he's aware enough that, you know, as much as he says he kind of fakes emotions and stuff like that, he's obviously aware who he is, and maybe part of him even realizes to a certain extent, as much as he needs to kill people and all this is just to satisfy that hunger inside of him, he knows what he's doing is wrong, you know, so he's very self-aware. And I really like that. I thought that was a pretty cool thing to say. And like I say, he's going to have to go back to doing what he does. Could it be the job? Could it be the killing? Could be both. Who knows? Maybe he's just quite happily to live the rest of his life out on his boat, doing his own thing, being away from everybody else. Maybe that's the life he would have chosen for himself. But he gets back to his apartment and Deb has come over for breakfast. And they're discussing about the refrigerated truck that obviously we've seen in the previous episode. That's what Dexter had told Deborah to look for this killer that they're looking for. Obviously, we see the truck go past Dexter and they throw the severed head at his car. And Deborah's saying how they need to find this truck, and Dexter tells her that's your ticket into homicide. Obviously, she's in Vice at the moment. She wants to get out of Vice, get into homicide, and he's saying that's your way. You find that truck, they'll get you in. You know, you'll be able to prove who you are at the minute. And it's kind of weird to look back on, because the Deborah that I know from watching the show is very confident, very self-assured, knows what she's doing, knows what she wants. And it's interesting to go back and watch these earlier episodes where you see that she's in that very early stage where she is a bit more vulnerable, I guess, and kind of, has her guard up a bit and hasn't got that confidence that you get, I suppose, from doing the job that she does. But Dexter has always kind of been that rock for her, where he's kind of telling her, you know what you need to do, you just need to do it, basically. And Deborah at this point is saying that LaGuerta has her back talking to the hookers where she'd been working undercover because they're looking for a witness. LaGuerta's convinced someone witnessed this. We need to find out who it was. And he's telling her that if you want to look for that truck, just because she's making you do that doesn't mean you can't look for the truck on your own time. So that's what she begins to do. She starts looking for the truck on her own time. At the meantime, though, while they're sat having breakfast, she's helping him pick out a tie because he's due in court. He's got to do his day job stuff. And she mentions to him, why don't we ever talk brother-sister stuff? We're always talking work. And he simply responds by saying, well, Dad was a cop. You're a cop. I work for the cops. To us, this is brother-sister stuff. And I guess it's interesting, obviously, if you work in the same field as a member of your family, or as just in general, I suppose. For me and my family, we all work in kind of very different areas, I guess. So our family time stuff is just general conversation, where for these, like I say, you spend most of your day working as a police officer, and your brother also works there in a different department, but you all work on the same stuff. Naturally, I guess that's what your normal time conversation is going to be about. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of note that I found there. But before he does leave for court, and after Deb's left, he goes back to the freezer where the killer had left the doll parts that we noticed at the end of the previous episode, that great cliffhanger we were left with. And he's looking at the parts, and as he picks up the hand, he notices that one of the doll hands has different coloured fingernails on each finger. And he says that he has all of the puzzle pieces, but he doesn't yet know how to put them together. And that's going to come back a bit later on. But after that, we head to Dexter in court, where he's given his testimony for a case that he's been working on. This is something I have had a little bit of experience with, albeit in a mock environment from the uni course I mentioned I was doing. And you kind of sat cross-examination sort of thing. But he's sat there and he's saying basically who he is, what he's there for, how long he's worked in the blood spatter analyst field. And the prosecutor asks him, how many cases have you worked on? And he says 2,103. And the prosecutor's like, oh, approximately. And he's like, no, 2,103. And that for me was okay. That just shows you the level of detail and precision that he has in his life. He's so organized. And obviously a lot of this goes back to the code with Harry. You have to be certain, you have to do your due diligence. And if he's kind of been molded his entire life to think that way, that's just how precise he is. I thought that was quite an interesting thing to point out. After he's done doing his part of the trial, I guess, he heads back out to the lobby where the regular people are waiting to either go into court or, just doing whatever they're doing. And he spots a family in the courtroom and he sees them all crying. There's a dad, a wife, a mum and dad and a daughter, I believe. And they're all sat crying and the dad says, I'll take care of this. So he gets up and heads on into one of the courtrooms. And Dexter, at this point, he decides to follow him because he says, well, a lot of people will look at that family and see grief. I look and I see an opportunity. Now, this goes back to, again, Dexter seemingly always on the hunt to satisfy that need. These family are crying, something's happened. Maybe there's someone there that I can put on my table. And we will get to him in a minute, because where we're at now is Dexter follows the man into a courtroom where there is a man on trial for killing someone because he was drunk driving, and he left the body and drove off, and the teenage boy was left there for hours before he died. And the man who we saw crying with his family, the guy who died was this man's son, so it was his teenage son that passed away. And the lad who was on trial is Matt Chambers, is the man who Dexter was who I referred to earlier, who's played by Sam Trammell. And Dexter, when he's sat there, he says, and this is something else I found quite interesting, he says, Dexter, he can see their pain, and on some level he can even understand their pain. He just can't feel their pain. And like I say, Matt Chambers is the guy who's the drunk driver, and he's given his testimony, and Dexter tells us, he said, it's only a matter of time until his crocodile tears wear off. And like, Dexter can see straight through this guy, knowing that everything he's saying, he's basically putting on an act. I guess in many ways, Dexter has been putting on a similar act, so, it's probably easier for him to spot this kind of thing. But we'll come back to him a bit later on. Back in his day job, Dexter arrives at a crime scene, and it looks as if we've got a body there, and it looks as if either someone has jumped from a highway or has been pushed. And LaGuerta and Batista and everyone are there, and LaGuerta's very flirty with him again. And this, again, I remember it being a thing in the first few episodes. I do think it dies off after a little while. But yeah, I forgot just how flirty she was with him at the time, and he's very sort of uncomfortable about it all. So Dexter notices that the victim on the ground who they're there for, there's something in his mouth. So as he kind of gets his tools and tries to take it out, as he pulls something out of his mouth, Dexter gets splattered with blood in his face. And basically, Dexter seems to think this guy has human flesh in his mouth, as if he's bit something or bit someone as he's been thrown or whatever in some sort of fight. Dexter gets all cleaned up and he's fine. Back at the precinct, Dorks, who obviously we met in the first episode, the guy who doesn't like Dexter at all, he comes into the station, he's all angry. And then we find out the reason he's so angry is the guy who was the victim that Dexter's just been dealing with there was a guy who was named Ricky Simmons, and this guy was a cop. So LaGuerta obviously tells everyone in the station, like, he was one of our own, sort of, we've lost a guy of our own. At this point, it kind of makes a bit more sense as to why Dorks would be so angry. Now, Dorks and LaGuerta then head off to make what's known as a next of kin notification. Basically, they go to the house of Ricky Simmons, presumably to tell his wife or kids or whatever that, this has happened. And you see it in movies and stuff all the time. It's always really awful. I can't ever imagine being in that situation myself. But she makes a point of saying to him that when LaGuerta and Dorks were partners back before they got their promotion, Dorks always made a point of getting out of this kind of thing. He never wanted to be there for next of kin notifications. So she found interesting that Dorks wanted to be there for this one. And he says, well, we used to play softball together. He's a good cop. He's the least I can do. You're like, okay, fair enough. That's a standard response, I guess. But anyway, as they're knocking on the door, then there's no answer. So Dorks decides he just has a quick look through the window, see if there's anything out of the ordinary. And he sees something that we don't know what he sees right yet. But anyway, he gets his gun out and they kind of break in because obviously Dorks has seen something rather. When he gets inside, we see he's very visibly shaken, which for him, I believe he's like ex-military. I think that's what he is, like some sort of special forces. So if you can imagine any sort of stereotypical casting of that kind of role, someone who's very tough and, takes no crap and doesn't really seem in touch with their emotions. I know it's a very stereotypical approach, and thankfully that's not the way things are always taken these days. But this was 2006. Maybe this role today might have shown a bit more emotion, but you could see he's very visibly shaken. So that's what made it seem out of character for me, because like I say, he's came across as this very, nothing bothers him and, he'll just kill everybody kind of attitude, I suppose. Very good at his job, but doesn't really care about anything. And what they've found inside is that there's a woman bleeding out on the floor. So while LaGuerta's calling it in, Dorks is trying to comfort her and he starts referring to her by her first name. He says, Karen, it's James, like, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry, like, the ambulance is coming and stuff. Again, we kind of touch back on that a bit more later. But as they're at the house, Dexter and the crew, as everyone arrives to kind of sort out the scene, I guess, that Karen's been taken to hospital. And Captain Matthews is there as well. And that's when we find out that Ricky, the guy who was killed, this is his wife, obviously, who's laid out on the floor. He has been deep undercover for 10 months in the Guerrero family. Now, we don't know anything about the Guerrero family as of yet, but from what I understand here is essentially it's kind of like a drug cartel, I suppose. Guerrero's the boss, and Ricky has been undercover for 10 months working for him, I guess, to try and bring him down. As they're looking through the property and Dexter's taking these photos of the crime scene and stuff, he spots that there's some inconsistencies with the blood patterns. And then he kind of notices something is under the couch. And when they look, it's the wife's phone. And the last number she dialed was the husband. And Dorks grabs it and he says, oh, great work, Batista. And Batista's trying to say, it wasn't me, it was Dexter. But, Dorks and Dexter are like, he doesn't care. So he walks off. Next thing, we move on kind of from this really kind of dark stuff to then something a bit more lighter. And we see that Dexter is playing with Cody, one of Rita's kids. And Rita and Aster have been making homemade cookies. So they're all kind of very happy families. It's kind of nice. And Dexter tells us the thing that surprised him the most about Rita is how much he likes being with her. And like I say, this is a guy who's been very guarded about kind of getting close with people, I suppose. He essentially mentioned in episode 1 that he uses Rita as a cover, I suppose. But eventually, he obviously likes her, and you spend enough time with someone in that kind of environment, and when you're dating them, I guess, it's only natural that regardless of whether you're classify yourself as kind of having no feelings or whatever, sooner or later, whether you want it to happen or not, you are going to start enjoying being around this person. This is what he says, and he says whatever that happens with a woman who he feels comfortable, that's where it all goes wrong. So he's probably going to be on the guard for that happening, because he doesn't want to have to bail, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, next day, Dexter is woken up by a phone call from Deborah, and she says that she's found the refrigerated truck that they've been looking for, so he heads off to meet her. The whole crew are there, and she asks Dexter if the truck he saw that night is this one, and he tells us yes, but he says to her it's hard to say. And this, for me, was the first time we noticed that Dexter wants to figure out something on his own before the cops do. Obviously, this case in particular, whoever the killer is seemingly targeting Dexter, as not in a way of wanting to kill him, but just in a way of trying to get his attention, as we've seen. Dexter is intrigued by that, and he's, instead of him immediately taking sides with the cops, he's kind of like, okay, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but he knows it is because he wants to find out before they do. And that's the first time we see that happen. It does happen quite a lot throughout the series, but like I said, it's the first time we notice it. But when they get there, she says to him, is there any reason why the truck would still be running? And he says, well, because it keeps the refrigerated part cold. So they open the back of the truck, and inside the back of this truck is a giant block of ice, and it's got 5 fingertips inside of it. And while they're examining it, Dexter says to us, of all the body parts and bones he could have left behind, he left them the one thing that they need to identify the victim. So whoever this killer is playing games with them. Back in the lab, they begin to melt all this ice, and this is where, as it begins to melt and we can see through it, we notice that the fingernails are all painted different colours, just like the hand that was on the doll in Dexter's freezer back at his place. And Dexter tells us he thinks the killer is trying to impress him. And it's starting to work. Dexter seems very impressed by who this guy is, meaning more and more so he wants to know who he is and wants to meet him. I guess it's hard to tell at this point if Dexter wants to meet him to kill him, or if Dexter wants to meet him to be friends with him. Because, again, they both kind of share similar ways of doing stuff, but Dexter's very impressed with the way that this killer is working. Have you mentioned in the previous episode, like when he drained all the blood, he was like, why didn't I think of that? Stuff like that. So maybe Dexter wants to meet him so he can learn from him and become a better killer. Not clear at this point, but Dexter is fascinated by the guy. So back at the station, the cops now have a suspect in the cop killing from earlier on, where, like I said, Dexter took something from the guy's mouth. They've matched that DNA to a guy called Norberto Cervantes, who is a known associate of the Guerrero family. Obviously, the cop, as we mentioned, been working undercover for Guerrero. So Dokes takes off to arrest this guy and takes a SWAT team with him. And it's here that we meet the leader of the Guerrero family. Dokes puts cuffs on this Cervantes guy and they're arresting him. And Guerrero's saying to him, is that really necessary? And Dokes tells him that it's a dangerous world. And Guerrero says, yeah, it is. And one can't be too careful, detective. Obviously, very clearly saying, Guerrero at this point, I believe, would think he's untouchable. And to a certain extent, maybe he is. Maybe that's why they've had to do this kind of undercover thing to try and bring him down, because they haven't tried and failed many times before. It's very interesting. I always find that fascinating when you have like a sort of a mob kind of mafia type situation. So yeah, that's an interesting one. But anyway, back in the courthouse, Matt Chambers, the guy who was the drunk driver, is on the stand. He tells the jury that he's been sober for a year now. And Dexter tells us that Matt's found a way to cheat the system. He knows this, whatever he's saying here, there's something not quite adding up, but so is Dexter. He knows how to cheat the system too. So it's again back to that, being able to spot the guy because of similar traits in your own personality, I suppose. Very quickly seen there, but we're back at the precinct again, and Dokes and LaGuerta are playing a voicemail that was found on the phone that Dexter found under the couch that belonged to the Ricky's wife, Karen. And they're playing this voicemail to the man they arrested, Norberto Cervantes. And on the voicemail, you can hear a gunshot. Now, this is where they're basically trying to say, like, well, we know it was you, sort of thing. And Cervantes says, word on the street is that Ricky's wife, Karen, was sleeping around. So maybe Ricky found out and he killed her before killing himself. He's very sort of cocky and arrogant, your typical kind of what you'd expect from someone who believes they're untouchable. At this point, Dorks just straight up punches him in the face, which I just didn't see coming for some reason. I was like, well, okay. And LaGuerta kind of breaks it up and he says, look, we know it was you on the causeway. We can put you on the causeway where we found Ricky's body. And as they take off a bandage that's on Cervantes' arm, you see there's a chunk of skin missing. So yeah, it's quite obvious that it was this guy. So we're back at the Simmons house and Dexter and Batista are there trying to map out exactly what happened to Karen. Karen at this point is in surgery, I believe. Obviously, Dorks and LaGuerta got there to her. She was still alive. But they're trying to find out exactly what happened. And Dexter is kind of explaining to Batista through the way the blood is, basically what went down. And as they're going through that, Dexter notices a spot of blood on a kitchen tile, which he says can't be from the victim, just the way everything is. It just can't be from him. So they take up this tile and they take that back to the precinct to match up the blood, and it turns out that blood also belongs to Cervantes, so they've now been able to put this guy at both crime scenes, and Dorks is saying to him, are you sure? Are you 100% sure? And this is the first time you kind of see, because this is personal for him, he's not being a dick with Dexter. He's asking him, like, are you absolutely sure? Like this, he's being very professional with him, which is weird, because like I say, he doesn't really like him. And he says, yep. So Dorks wants to go and charge the guy, but LaGuerta is thinking bigger picture. She wants to know if they can use Cervantes to take down Guerrero. And Dorks is trying to argue his point. He's like, look, we've already got a win. This is the guy who killed this guy. He's tried to kill this woman. We've got him. We and he's trying to say, like, let's just go and arrest him. And she's, like, say, trying to see the bigger picture. And this is where sometimes, depending on your opinion, a lot of people have mentioned, like, and I say in the first episode, it's mentioned by Deborah a few times as well, that they don't really think LaGuerta's very smart. Well, I'm always of the opinion, I believe she is. I think she got a bit of a bad rap with a few of the earlier episodes. And for me, I can understand where she's coming from. This, should we take out this guy who's one of the top guys that he has? Or can we use him somehow to get the top guy? You've seen it in a bunch of other films. Think of The Dark Knight, for example. All the other people are trying to get to the mob boss. And yeah, you might get a few of these guys off the streets, but what if we can get the top guy? So I can understand her logic, but obviously, he's not too happy with that. We then are treated to a flashback episode of Dexter as a teenager with Harry, and Harry is in all of his dress uniform, and he's rehearsing his eulogy for his partner who was killed. And Harry talks about wanting to balance the books, catching the guy who killed his partner. Now, it's not clear at this point, but you can kind of, I guess, go off Harry's tone that he's maybe thinking, okay, we're not going to catch him as cops, but maybe you can get him, Dexter. And this, again, we touched on kind of towards the end of the first episode. That's kind of where Harry was leaning with some stuff. And I think maybe this is where the first part of that goes. But back in present day, Dexter is visiting a bar. And when he gets there, we realize the reason he's at this bar is because Matt Chambers, the drunk driver from earlier, is there. And he's sat at the bar getting drunk. So this guy's been telling everyone he's been sober for a year. That's what he told the jury in the court. But obviously, he was lying. Dexter begins to strike up a conversation with him. The man has no idea who Dexter is. They never crossed paths in the courtrooms because Dexter wasn't there for his trial. Dexter was there for something else. And Dexter just managed to find himself a seat at the back of the courtroom, I guess, to just listen in and try and start doing his research on this guy. So this is essentially Dexter following up on that, I suppose. And he strikes up a conversation. Dexter's very good at kind of creating a conversation with his would-be victims, like just to kind of learn a bit more about them. And Dexter says, he's just broke up with his wife. His wife seemed to think he had a drinking problem, all that kind of stuff. So try and find a bit of common ground with the guy, I suppose. And during their conversation, Matt says to him, there's nothing a new town can't cure. And Dexter get the impression that Matt's going to be off soon. So, if I'm going to kill him, I need to know that he's absolutely the guy who deserves to be on my table. And I need to do it soon because, like I say, he's going to be leaving town soon. So as Matt leaves, Dexter grabs Matt's glass from the bar so he can run some DNA tests on him to make sure it's the guy who he's after. So Dexter runs Matt's fingerprints through a database and he sees that Matt has been charged with crimes and got away with them in other towns and other states where he's either killed someone or severely injured them due to his drink driving. So at this point, Dexter's convinced, okay, I want him on my table. We move on to the hospital, and this is where Dorks and LaGuerta are there, and Dorks is checking on Karen, Ricky's wife, and we get to see kind of LaGuerta really starting to notice, okay, Dorks is very invested in this particular case, and in particular the wife. And maybe she's thinking back to what Cervantes was saying about how the wife was apparently sleeping around, starting to put two and two together. But before we can really dive into that any further, we are now on a double date. Rita and Dexter are on a double date with Deborah and her boyfriend Sean, a mechanic. You can see the two of them really can't keep their hands off each other. And Dexter's really grilling him, asking him, like what kind of stuff he does. And it's understandable, it's what big brothers do, I suppose. But the one thing that I found interesting about this scene as well, Deborah and her boyfriend are all over each other. Dexter and Rita are very opposite. And Dexter points out to us, he says, I can kill someone, dismember their body, and be in home in time for Letterman. But when my girlfriend is feeling insecure, I am totally lost. No idea what to do. Curious look into the mind of Dexter. Like you say, he can do all that stuff, but the regular human emotion stuff he really struggles with. But at this point, we are moving quickly on to a scene where Cervantes, the man who has currently been arrested for the murder and attempted murder of Ricky and Karen, he's been moved cells by a guard. The guard says, we want you somewhere more secure. And as he is leaving, the guard kills him. So you can clearly see, obviously, Guerrero has people in places where if he needs something doing, he needs something taken care of, he's got the ability to do that. So this guard kills him and he says this is for Mr. Guerrero, so that's what's happened. So that the guy who has been arrested for the murder has now been killed himself. Next, we get a scene where we're back with Dexter and Rita, and they're back at Rita's place, and they're just kissing and stuff, and it kind of gets a little bit more physical, and Rita kind of freaks out a little bit again, like she did in the first episode. And Dexter says to her, we have an elephant in the room, and its name is sex. Obviously, they haven't been together that way because a lot of Rita's past, and she's very kind of standoffish of it, understandably, because of what she's been through. But she's very comforted by the fact that that Dexter says to Rita, look, we're not going to even worry about that until it's right for both of us, because if it's only right for one of us, then it's not right at all. So Dexter kind of puts her mind at ease about the whole situation. Okay, back in Dexter's lab, which is a sentence I promised myself I would never say on this podcast, but I'm on episode 2 and I've said it already. That's a very different show, very good cartoon, but not what we are talking about today. He is examining the fingerprints that they found in the block of ice, the fingertips rather, that they found in the block of ice, and Deborah's there with him as well. And it confirms that it was another hooker. And you can see that Deborah's very he got another one of my girls. She still considers the girls that she worked with while undercover her responsibility, I suppose, and feels guilty for it. And Dexter says to us that Deborah puts on a front so that the world doesn't see how vulnerable she is, and he puts on a front so that the world doesn't see how vulnerable he's not. So it's a very interesting dynamic the two of them have there. But at this point, Deborah's been taken off to see Captain Matthews, and she finds out, because she found the truck, because of the work she's been doing, she is in fact being promoted to homicide. So she's finally out of vice, and she got what she's been after this entire time. Very happy for Deborah. She's out of vice and into homicide now. And LaGuerta says to Matthews after she's left, I hope you know what you're doing. And he just simply says, I promoted you, didn't I? So seems like Matthews knows what he's doing. Anyway, a little bit later on, we see Dorks is still working hard on the case for Ricky Simmons and the wife. And LaGuerta's asking him, why are you going so hard at this? And he's like, don't worry, I've clocked off. And then he says that she informs him that the wife has died of heart failure. So Dorks, being the way he is, just immediately gets straight back to work. But she forces him to confess that, look, it was what Cervantes said was true, wasn't it? You were the one sleeping with her. He says, yes. He said they were going to get a divorce, but she didn't want to bring it up to him while he was undercover because she didn't want to, make it more difficult for him. So, yeah, unfortunately, the wife has now passed away. And like I said, Dorks was in love with her by the sounds of things, but because the way he is, he doesn't really show emotion like everyone else, I suppose. He's kind of diving straight back into his work. And, that's just how people deal with grief, man. Everyone deals differently, don't they? So, very interesting look into that side of Dorks there. Anyway, moving on, Dexter is ready to capture Matt Chambers. He's all sat waiting for him. He's going to put him on his table. He gets a text from Deborah saying, you have to meet me for dinner. It's important. Nothing else is more important. You have to come meet me. And when he goes, he says, okay, well, I can come back for Matt later. He gets there and they're celebrating the fact that Deborah's been transferred to homicide. And while they're eating their dinner, he notices that Guerrero is in the same restaurant. That's very interesting. We get another flashback scene where Dexter is stood out in the rain. He's a teenager and he's waiting for Harry to come pick him up. Harry eventually gets there and Dexter's like, what the hell, man? Like, what's going on? Why are you late? And Harry tells him that the judge let his partner's killer walk because the bust wasn't righteous. So something went wrong when they arrested the guy who killed Harry's partner. And because of the way it went, we don't know exactly what happened. The judge has let him off because he wasn't arrested properly. Maybe he wasn't read his rights. Maybe, I don't know what exactly happened, but something went wrong there. And unfortunately, that is a thing that happens sometimes. And it's crazy to think that that's even a thing. You know, this guy, you could prove someone killed so-and-so or whatever. But if you weren't arrested in the proper way or something, you could, you can get away with it. And Harry is obviously very upset about this. And Dexter's saying, okay, well, can anyone do anything? Or is this just the way it is? The world just keeps spinning out of control. And Harry very stoically responds, no, it can always be set right again. And again, this is, okay, it seems like Harry is essentially saying to Dexter, okay, you can kill him. You can take care of it. But we're back in present day and Dexter tells us that a bad guy kills a cop and nothing happens. Well, not anymore. And he sees Guerrero heading to the bathroom and he follows him. And he says he has this opportunity, you can kind of see him, I've got this opportunity to take out this guy, the head of this sort of mafia family, essentially. And you see him take out the tranquilizer needle from his pocket. But when he takes it out, we are transitioned to Matt Chambers, who is wrapped on a table, and Dexter walks in with a laptop showing a home movie from the family that he hurt. Dexter takes his customary blood slide trophy. Matt tries to talk his way out of it, and Dexter kind of amuses him for a minute, but turns on his drill and kind of scares him, and Matt says it wasn't the booze it wasn't him that killed him, it was the booze, and he tries apologizing, but Dexter says, you've done this too many times to be sorry, and this is kill number 3 of the season for Dexter. Rest in peace, Matt Chambers. Or maybe not in peace, you're a bad man. Anyway, as Dexter's wrapping up the body through his monologue, he tells us that Guerrero has chosen to live in a dangerous world, and that world doesn't need him to balance the books. Gets rid of the body, and back at his apartment, he puts the blood slide in the box with the rest of them, and he notices that the doll head that he'd put inside his freezer is now stuck back on the door. The killer has been back again, and this time he took away the doll pieces. And Dexter takes this as a message to go and find the killer. And he says, yes, I will. And then we get one of my absolutely favourite quotes from the entire show. And it says, there are no secrets in life, just hidden truths that lie beneath the surface. And I, for one, absolutely love that quote. I don't know why, something about it really resonates with me. I really like that. And that is the end of episode 2. Another fun episode. A lot more detail in this one because we're really starting to lay the groundwork with who these characters are, what their motivations are. And yeah, it's a really, really fun start to the series. And I hope you're enjoying my recap of it, I guess. I'm trying to keep these episodes around about 30 minutes if I can, because I'm always wary that I don't want to talk too long. There's a lot of information to get in the episodes. And there's things that as we go on and as we learn, because it's a learning process for me, I'll probably start leaving little bits out. As always, your feedback is invaluable. So feel free to leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube, or message me on Twitter or Instagram, anything like that. All the information is down below in the links. I will look forward to seeing you in episode 3. But until then, thank you very, very much for listening. See you in the next one. Goodbye.